I sense a great deal of anxiety amongst the comments of the videos that I've posted recently. And the type of anxiety that I sense is around so many views, so many ideas, so many people, even within the frame of, those who focus on the Quran only, that it becomes almost like challenging to find a clear path forward. But I think the problem is actually broader than that, you see. I believe that Muslim scholarship in general, and that includes Salafist scholars, modernist scholars of Islam, traditionalist scholars, those in the Sufi tradition, all of them are finding it very, very challenging to navigate a scholarly paradigm, or to assume a paradigm that can be inclusive of both the Islamic ethos, worldview, as espoused in the Quran, as well as a modern trans-Muslim worldview. So a worldview that transcends the Quran and Muslim thinking. And recently we had a problem here in this part of the world where there was great pressure on a clergy body. We have a local clergy body, or South African Clerical Institute, and they are fairly well supported by, let's say, 80% of the Muslim people. And they were under pressure by the mass media and by secularists and by modernists, postmodernists, to issue a firm position on where they stand with respect to the LGBT phenomenon. And of course, we know that traditional Islam is has a particular strong view on LGBT, and which is based in the Quran and based in hadiths. I would say the ideas that come from the hadiths are kind of maverick. I don't see any sense in those ideas, but the idea in the Quran is much more sensible with respect to LGBT, and in particular, the idea of sodomy and gay sex. So then there's also this institute, the clergy body that I'm referring to, had to issue a statement, but because they are officially sanctioned and they prefer to be in the good books of the ruling establishment in this country, they had to issue a very lukewarm, sort of apologetic position. And it was actually embarrassing to see how apologetic they had to be about the LGBT thing. And these people, obviously, if you look at the hadith books, then it was a hypocritical pronouncement, because I know what is said in the hadiths about LGBT, about sodomy. Obviously, it says there these people must be killed, and they stayed far away from the hadiths in this case. And it's also interesting how hypocritical these traditionalist scholars are. When the powers that be pressurize them, then they stay away from hadiths. But when it's safe for them to come out, then they bring all their hadiths out again, and then they want to rule the world with their silly texts, hadith texts, and so on. So they were very mild and very lukewarm in their criticism. In fact, the idea was to the effect that, we allow people to do whatever they want to do. People are free. This is a democratic country, but based on our scriptures, we cannot encourage it. So that was the tone of the so-called refutation. And I believe it's so embarrassing for a fraternity that represents the Word of God, that represents the code, the book, the kitab, the philosophy that is officially sanctioned by the Creator of the universe, that they should act in such an apologetic way in criticizing something which is, according to the Quran, not to be supported. Right. So I think they have a problem with how do you criticize phenomena in the West. And it's equally valid with Salafists, that people like Muhammad Hijab and these guys, Ali Dawah and the ilk, and also Daniel Hakikachu. If you look at their videos, maybe not Daniel so much. Daniel just couldn't be bothered. Hakikachu, the Muslim, I think, critique or something like that. That's his website. So the problem they have in critiquing phenomena in the West, abominable, negative, harmful phenomena or social practices, the problem that they have is that they have adopted and embraced the paradigm of postmodernism. That's the problem they have. Once you commit yourself to that paradigm, the postmodern paradigm, then you are forced to reason within that paradigm. And then you become, you sound irrational if you then reason using tools that fall outside of that paradigm. Now, let me make it simple to all of you. One of the teachings of that paradigm, one of the assumptions within that paradigm of postmodernism is that there is no grand narrative. There is no meta narrative. There are only the local and the particular narrative, or the sectional narrative. And that sectional narrative is to do with identity, sexual preference, economic issues, and any critique, therefore, in terms of any phenomenon or any social phenomenon or any sub of these many narratives, any critique has to take place within that sub-narrative. In fact, they wouldn't use the word sub-narrative. The narrative would be assumed to be a local, particularist narrative. And so if we look, for example, at how the West views Islam in America, in the postmodern paradigm, is that Islam constitutes within itself a coherent system of reasoning and thinking, and it's a narrative in its own right. Right, and so Islam is justified in that sense, warts and all, flawed hadiths and all. If go and look at a woman like Ilhan Omar and see her conceptualization of Islam. Islam is something that is a narrative, and whatever we can allow to dominate within that narrative, that is Islam. And so if the dominant narrative within Islam becomes that of extreme liberalism, ultra-liberalism, then that is it. And their job is to shape the narrative of Islam. Right. So you have to mold the narrative in accordance with your ideal view, understanding of how you want the narrative to be. So how do you criticize? And it's convenient for Muslims to admit to that narrative or to assume that paradigm of postmodernism. It's convenient in the West. The Dems in America, they are the main proponents or advancers of that narrative of postmodernism. Some people call it cultural Marxism. Some people use the term, critical theory. They're not strictly speaking the same thing. Critical theory has different roots. It comes from Marxism, which comes from a Hegelian view of the world, which allows for critique and progression and unfolding, and a understanding of history, which is a progressive understanding that history is something that unfolds and that becomes more elaborate over time, and that you have the phenomenon of emergence. So, strictly speaking, postmodernism is not Hegelian or Marxist. And often these two are conflated. But postmodernism is more about a rejection of any structural perception or conception of the world. And what is constructivism? Constructivism is the idea that all things hold as one system, as one logical and coherent system, or if it's not, then at least there is a possibility of constructing a coherent whole, right? And that goes for society, that goes for thinking, that goes for everything. So structuralism was very big in the 70s and 60s. And obviously it's a modernist conception of the world, that you can make the whole world in a coherent whole. You can create a world that is coherent and mutually consistent, internally consistent. Post-structuralism or postmodernism is the idea that there is no coherent whole, and that only the parts can make sense. And then the parts can make sense that we determine what to be sense. And so what Muslims in America have done is, ignorantly, they have jumped into bed with the Dems and with the post-structuralists and the postmodernists, and they have assumed these ideas of multiple truths. And so you get the phenomenon of Muslims feeling defended, feeling vindicated by the multiple truth paradigm, because now they feel some form of legitimization, as a truth, as a narrative that has legitimacy within a broader set of independent narratives. They feel vindicated and they feel protected. And in fact, they do find protection. And so if you debate with Muslims in America, you can see that there's almost like a harking, there's a reverting back to traditionalist Islam. And these Salafis are becoming very popular. Why? Because they've put you all in your little homeland, in your corral, where you can practice your crazy religion because that is your narrative. And they become very arrogant, in fact, the Salafists who operate in America and Britain, is because they've almost been given a sandbox where you can practice your ridiculous idea of Islam. And that arrogance come forward in their speech. I would challenge them to go and have that arrogance for those views in some Arab countries. I doubt that they will be able to do it. But in this postmodernist conception of the world, which you find in the UK, in America, and in Europe mostly, they almost like experience a protected position for their Islam and for their Muslimness. And to the ire or to the discontent of the broader society there, because now, being a Muslim is tantamount to being a victim category. And America is at a phase in its history where victimhood is celebrated. Victimhood is a badge of honor. And the victim is the hero. And Muslims now, as a victim category, regard themselves now as, enjoying some sort of elevation due to this whole victimhood phenomenon in the West, in America especially. So what they're doing is they're making the mistake of drinking the poison of postmodernism and converting to that, but then making themselves prone to being castrated when it comes to criticizing the competing or the anti-Islamic phenomena such as LGBT, or such as the gender agenda, the third wave feminism. And then Muslims don't have the tools because they've already used up their credibility or the credit in their own vindication. And so because we are vindicated by postmodernism, we dare not then criticize other narratives within this house of postmodernism. Are you with me? And that is the challenge, that's the problem that scholars in the West and our official clerical establishment face, is that they feel that this postmodern government or system has given us legitimacy. How dare we criticize the LGBT or the whatever other, the Black Lives Matter or any other ridiculous victim category that they've invented. And LGBT, of course, is also a victim category that they've invented. So the way that you criticize, you cannot do it within a postmodern conceptualization. And of course, the other option is, historically, is that we escape this postmodernist scholarly paradigm, which is also, there's other terms they use for it, like interpretivism, like, we need to escape it so that we can be in a position where we can fairly and justly criticize the flaws and the errors and the dangers and the threats within Western society, such as the feminist movement, the transgender movement, and all of these. And we can only launch a legitimate and valid criticism if we do it from outside of that postmodern conceptualization. Now, where do we locate ourselves? That's the question. Where do we locate ourselves? If we are not to be postmodern scholars, then where are we? Are we going to become science, positivist scholars? Are we going to become strictly scientific in our criticism? Because that's also not healthy. That's also not good, because surely we cannot go for strict scientism and positivism in our critique, because that would eliminate the idea of God. The idea that all science and all knowledge have to be empirically founded. It creates a problem for us arguing for the existence of the ghaib, of the unknown, the unseen, because that is the basis of our book, the Qur'an, is that there is a world out there that is absolutely never to be, that cannot be perceived, and by normal human senses. And so the third option, if we can't use scientism or positivism as a paradigm, and we can't use postmodernism as a paradigm, then the only option that remains is the third paradigm, which fortunately I discovered 5 years ago when I did my doctoral degree. I discovered that there is a third paradigm, and that paradigm is the paradigm of transcendental realism. It is realism as positivism is, but soft realism. Realism in the sense where there is objective reality, there is an objective truth, but it is only knowable to God. We as human beings will always strive to reach an understanding of that reality. And that is transcendental realism. So transcendental realism is the position or the paradigm that there are certain aspects of the world, of reality, of the universe, that are impenetrable by our senses, and that we can really only make best estimates of. And so that is the idea of the eternal Qur'an, the lawhun mahfuz, the absolute divine position and tablet which is inscribed and in the presence of God. The lawhun mahfuzun. We can only ever estimate and make best case estimates based on our own sense perception, based on our own reasoning, based on our own experiences. And that is really what Muslim scholarship should be about, I believe. And because of that outlook, that paradigm, there's the phenomenon called judgmental rationality. Judgmental rationality means that we can indeed form a judgment on reality based on the best rational reasoning and the best empirical evidencing. So if we apply the best evidencing empirically and you apply the best reasoning, you can in fact arrive at a good judgment on what reality is. Now, yes, I agree with you. We can't have a perfect judgment on what reality is, but we can have a best judgment. Because postmodernism argues that there is absolutely no moral positioning. There is absolute equivalence amongst all viewpoints. Even the most stupid viewpoint and the most intelligent viewpoint have equivalence in terms of postmodernism, which is why you get the most ridiculous, outlandish beliefs emanating from that school. What critical realism or transcendental realism says is that not all viewpoints are equally valid or equally moral. Not that any viewpoint can enjoy perfect status, because we believe as transcendental realists that we in our understanding are limited, but the truth is not limited. So truth is there, and truth is absolute and ultimate and objective, but our understanding of it is not always perfect and 100%. And we must assume a somewhat of a humble position when we make any claims to truth. And that is, I believe, the critical transformation that we need to undertake philosophically and from a scholarly perspective for us to really be in a position to critique the West.